Hi and welcome to the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. Today, we're happy to welcome Caspar, founder and CEO of the internationally active, multiple award-winning architecture studio from Germany that is named after himself. The company Caspar takes into account the hybrid dialogical thinking which sees all designs as strategies for the future and the construction industry transformation. If you're an urban tech founder about to raise a round, do reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see if we should play together.
Hi, Caspar. Thank you for being with us today and pleasure having you. You're an architect with quite an impressive track record, and we've been in discussions quite a while now, and it always amazes us what you do in your projects and how you build a huge company out of it. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your past, and the story behind Caspar Architects?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Thanks a lot, first of all, for having the chance to be with you guys. I mean, the company is big, but it's not huge. I want to say it's a proper studio, but huge might be considered something else. So the way how I got to architecture started in my early years because my parents were moving around a lot. So we'd always had to look out for new houses. My mother started fitting them out. Sometimes we had to build something in, and this was super interesting for me. And then at one point, I went to boarding school and I just started drawing there because, during the studies, I always had free time, didn't really know what to do with myself. Had to stay at my desk, but had to be quiet. And then I just started drawing. And afterwards, I went to New York to go to high school there and had the chance to join an architecture class, which was a very opening thing for me and was a lot of fun. I started working in different offices afterwards. When I finished school, I wasn't really decided if I wanted to become an architect or an art leader. So I used the excuse of not having, that I didn't make my choice yet, to move to Italy for 1 year. Really wonderful experience by learning classical drawing. So I was in a little artist studio and we were like a group of 20, 25 people, mostly from England, had an American teacher, and learned classical drawing and classical painting. This was like a very wonderful experience. But in that time, I understood that my choice would go towards architecture because I just loved doing things and doing things myself. So then I started studying in Aachen, a very good school here in Germany, and later on changed over to Berlin because I was super excited that it was in 95 to see what Berlin is like. And there were so many different influences in Berlin at that time. It was an amazing experience. And afterwards, I started working for different architects, or even during my studies for Helmut Jahn in Chicago, which was really incredible, especially since I'm a huge fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. And that's where he started out and visited, of course, a lot of his projects there. Then had the chance to work for Renzo Piano in Genova, which was also a wonderful time. The office was just incredible. I had a very wonderful team, young guys from Italy who I lived together with, and really had a great time back then. And then actually went back to Cologne, where my family comes from, and worked for an office called Casp, Engel and Zimmermann. It was quite amazing because I had the chance to work for one of the partners. The studio had about 200 people, was working in Germany, but also abroad, a lot of projects in China. Since I worked so close together with Michael, I was very quick in my evolution. I started doing my own projects. I started acquiring my own projects. We won very big competitions. Then at a certain point, Michael wanted me to become a partner. I was super happy about it. Jürgen, the other guy, who said that he also wanted me to become a partner, had a different time schedule than we had. He thought more about 5 to 10 years. I wasn't even 30 at that point. I was not really willing to think about 5 to 10 years. So I left the practice and started my own. That was actually quite simple. I just bought a notebook and a friend of mine offered me, if you ever want to do your own thing, just come to my office and I'll have a desk for you. Today we would call it a startup. And actually then I partnered up with Holger Meyer and the thing grew quite quickly. When I started, I was never thinking about having such a big office. We grew up to 175 employees. We had offices in Frankfurt, Cologne, Hamburg, Munich, Bucharest and Palma de Mallorca. It was just fantastic. And then we won with one of my most important projects, the Abtei Michaelsberg, an old cloister that we converted into a Catholic conference center. We won 2 MIPIM awards at the same time. I didn't even know that there were 2 that we could win. It was just like everything went super, super quick and everything was amazing. But at a certain point, I said, actually, the office is so big, the things that we're doing so much, is it actually what I wanted to do? And I had the feeling that I was not satisfied anymore with many of the projects that we had in our office, where I couldn't really lay my own personal concentration on. And so therefore, I decided that I actually wanted to do the next step. I started my own firm, or it was my own firm before as well, but before I had a partner, we were 50-50 partners, and Holger and me, we decided that we would both go our own ways, and I restarted with Caspar. It's the new name of the office, 75 employees in Cologne and Hamburg, and we changed a lot of things in our office. We changed a lot of things, how we look at architecture, how we work in architecture, and it is not the numbers of projects, the square meters, the numbers of employees and everything that have an importance to me. It is the question what we actually do, and if we are happy with the things that we're doing, if the quality of the architecture is appropriate, if the importance of the project and what it can add also to the cities and to society is worth working on it. Yeah, we changed a lot there, and it was quite a heavy time for me. Of course, I had to reorganize everything, and the company grew back to 120 people by now. It was still boring. Actually, I didn't want it to be that big, but then again, it just happened, and sometimes you need a certain size to make certain things possible. So therefore, I'm super happy about what happened in the last years, and I'm super happy that it was also possible, because of course, if I say the office has my name, and of course I'm the founder, but we're 120 people, and each of them have their stake in what we do. I would never be able to do what I do if I don't have these wonderful people working with me together. And I always say that I know from everyone what he's worth for our company and why he is in our company. And that is actually something that is really important to me. One thing that we also did was that besides concentrating on architecture, we started our own Casper eSearch, which is we do a lot of research in it, and we work on different topics, and we published 2 books in the last 2 years. And I think what it changed was that we changed our firm from a design-based architecture office to a content-based, which doesn't mean that design doesn't have an importance anymore. It means that we always want to have a base from which we can work, and we want to explain our clients why we do things, and we want to be able to discuss with them things and see what we can do and give them more than just a good design.
I have one question. I mean, I have many questions. But
only one, Mark?
No,
I have so many follow-on questions that I am not able to ask.
No, but do you still remember what was the first job that you did after you went out of the big architecture firm and have been on your own?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. I had certain things come together, and I was out. I mean, actually, with my old boss, I told him, listen, I'm still going to work for you. I'm still going to give everything, but the only thing is, when I decide that I want to do something else, you're going to let me go right away. And he was okay with it. Actually, he thought that I would leave because I actually wanted to go to London and work there. Then I was with a friend of mine who's a developer, with him for lunch, and we looked at a project that he just recently bought, and it was a conversion in Cologne, very nice project called the Capitol, very famous because Stefan Raab produced his show there, Caspar Schmitz produced the show there and everything, so it was very well known. So we walked through the project, and he said, Caspar, why don't you do your own office? And I said to him, it's very easy, give me the project, and I will have my own office. And he looked at me, are you serious? I was like, yes, I am serious. And then he said, okay, make me an offer. I said, okay, you will have my offer in 2 hours. So I went back, wrote an offer, sent it to him. And I met with him at, I think it was like 7 o'clock. Then we talked about the offer. And at 7:30, I had my first job.
Wow, okay.
It was 55,000 euros that we were getting for the conversion, which is actually a very small project for what we actually did there. But on the other hand, it gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do. Like also when I started my own office, not everything went always the way that I wanted. I mean, getting the first project is one thing, but getting the second project is much harder. We had a beautiful project in Düsseldorf that we wanted to convert, and the client just took longer and longer and longer. Like at a certain point, I was in Hamburg and tried to get money from an ATM. And I was just broke. I didn't have any money anymore. I had no money on my company account, on my private account. I was like, shit. And I was still waiting for money from Goldman Sachs. So I was like, guys, can someone please pay me?
Please.
Can someone please pay me?
This sounds like super exciting and like a great path, partially unexpected path, I would say.
Definitely. But it gave me a lot of humbleness to understand that not everything comes the way you always want it. And the thing is, like working in architecture, you're always working in projects. Every project is different. And every project or the time scale and the things go is unforeseeable. So you have no idea what happens with a project in 1 year, in 2 years. We had so many projects where we like celebrated, won a competition, we were super happy, celebrated. And then the thing didn't come for 4 years. And you're like, why is the project not coming? Or it never came. And then others where you were like, okay, this is never going to work out. And bang, there it was. Yeah, it's like juggling and always have a lot of balls in the air. And you actually have no idea how many balls you threw up there. And especially you don't know how many balls are coming down in the next second. So you always have to stay very attentive.
It's interesting that you mentioned that metaphor of like having balls in the air, because it's something like how I describe the dynamic between Mark and I, like him throwing up the balls and me trying to do something with it. Not trying to, obviously doing it in a very successful way.
Yeah, of course.
Talking about like challenges now, this is a good word now to jump into the first topic. So it should be about urban challenges. There is this resource efficiency strategy of the EU, and one part of that is the net neutral space consumption from 2050 onwards. Of course, this is referring to a much bigger topic, which is density in urban areas. So if we cannot grow the city itself, we have to make them more dense. And now we are super curious to understand, like your point of view, Caspar, how does this trend impact your work and the design of new buildings and even districts?
It's a super important aspect of our work. Density for our cities, as long as they want to grow, is more than important. And I think we do still have a lot of potential in our cities to even get denser than we are right now. One other aspect, as important as that one, is that we do have a big problem in our cities with the climate, the microclimate in our cities. So what we actually seeing, especially like this summer, is that our cities are getting warmer and warmer. We have two aspects that we have to think about. The one aspect is, on the one hand, we have to get denser in our cities. And on the other hand, we have to lower the temperatures in our cities, which we can only fulfill if we have more plants and trees and parks and free spaces in our city. So that is actually something that doesn't go well with each other. Looking at Singapore, for example, they just made a new plan for Singapore, how much park space they will have in the future. And of course, since they're more in an autocratic system, they just do it. So they just tear down buildings, they build new ones, and if they're building new ones, they even have to build parks like on different levels to get that space and to change that city. And I'm very sure that they will be very successful doing it. In Germany, we have the problem that since wherever we are building, we have a lot of public discussions about it. And on the one hand, to get denser is one thing, but to get the public to also support the project is much harder. So, for example, we have a project in Ulm that we just finished last year. It's called the Sedelhöfe. It's a very central project, a very big project. And there we had the chance on a 10,000 square meter plot to build 80,000 square meters of space. 40,000 below, 40,000 above. It's a lot. And we got a lot of different uses together. They had discussions there for many, many years. The focus before was on a city mall, and we changed it to what we call a classical European city part. We said, actually, we don't want to build a mall. We don't need to build a mall. We don't even need to build a mall for having the same amount of retail spaces. What we build is we build a big square, and around the square we have, like in a classical European city, we have houses. So we have houses where we have restaurants and retail and offices on top. We have another house where we have retail, and we have 112 apartments on top. Before on the projects, there were only 7 apartments. And then the other thing is that we added green spaces. Like, for example, where we have the apartments, we have like a huge outside space above 50 meters over the city. And you have a wonderful view on the Ulmer Münster, the main church there. So therefore, this way of getting more density into the city was super interesting, because it was possible to get the public behind us, but only because we had the space and we had the life that came with the space and the different uses that we had in it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the very famous quote that I like to use, it's from Jan Gehl. Jan Gehl is a Danish urbanist. He's been very influential on the development of the European cities over the last 30 years. He always says, first life, then spaces, and then buildings. I think what we have to do here in Germany is we have to have a little bit more confidence in our new developments. We have to see that we really are serious about the social aspects that inner city developments have to have for the city, that we don't put aliens into our cities. We have to have a connection to the people and to the city. And then it will be possible also to have more density in the city. But it is a very difficult discussion in Germany. And for example, we're building right now, we're also converting here in Düsseldorf a project from a former exhibition center into like a little village, like with different uses. We're building, it's called the Dijkerhöfe. We're building there 360 apartments. We have 13,000 square meters of office space. We have a hotel with 140 bedrooms. We have 3,000 square meters of retail and restaurants. We have a kindergarten. We have a mobility hub. We have everything in there. It's really incredible. And the whole basis of the project was the connection to the city where we build it in, or to the surrounding where we build it in. But nevertheless, when we had the public hearings about the project, the people were super aggressive towards us. It was a very tough way to get the project through. Not because the administration in Düsseldorf didn't want it, not because the politicians didn't want it, because it was very hard for the people to understand, the people living nearby, that change can also be a chance for them, and that we're not doing something bad, or we don't want to hurt them, but we will offer them something. So I'm very optimistic once the project is there and we will head on 5 years, they're going to use it, they're going to be super happy that they have it, and it's going to be like an accelerator for the whole quarter.
What is their reasoning? Like, why are they so full of fear?
Not to be very negative, but I think Germans are a little bit more conservative in that way. And one thing that is very holy to the German is what they own. So if they made it to buy a little house, then my house is my castle. And of course, you don't want anything around your castle. We had that in Cologne when we had like a very interesting discussion also about a project. One of the guys from the city administration said to me, listen, it's very simple. Someone asks what they want to build. You give them the permission. Then their neighbor wants to build the same. So you put just a mirror on their fence, and they will have thousands of reasons why that is not possible. It's just the way that people work.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something very interesting that you're explaining. And this is a very cool question of you, KJ. If you have bigger projects in cities, there are two main concerns, right? You have, let's claim it a little bit. You have the concerns from the wealthier people, in quote unquote, who own something there and who are afraid that the surrounding changes and has an impact on their value. And then there is, let's say, the social pressure on projects. Are they inclusive or exclusive, right? So these are, at least what we perceive, are the two main concerns. And I don't know if you heard about Marc Andreessen, the famous venture capitalist who founded one of the biggest VC firms in the world, Andreessen Horowitz. He recently wrote an article, very recognized article in the venture scene, why we need to build more, right? So he was targeting the whole real estate industry and say, look, whenever we build something, we're going to make something great out of it. We need to invest more. We need to build more, especially in the real estate world. So something that is very interesting. At the same time, he wrote a public letter to the administration at his local district where his house is, because he wanted to prevent a huge public housing unit that shall be built in front of his yard. This, to me, was something very, very specific that you can observe all over the world. In theory, we like to think that we can solve whatever problems we have, especially in dense areas. We can solve them through building as long as we're not attached to them directly, right? Is that something that you experience as well?
No, definitely. People are always for change if it's not happening in front of their building. People are for social housing, but when you tell them the social housing is going to be located just in front of your building, then, I mean, you have absurd discussions. Like, for example, in Düsseldorf, we have a thing, like at the Dijkerhoeve, we're building out of those 360 apartments, almost 160 are social housing apartments. And people there in that area were like, this is horrible. You can't do that to us. What are we doing? And then the question is like, who's actually able to rent there? And it is 50% of the population in Düsseldorf who would have the chance to go for public housing. And it is just like, it's the policeman, it's the nurse, it's, people that we need in our cities. And it's actually ridiculous how we behave there. It is really ridiculous. And I think people should be ashamed that they come up with topics like that.
The thing is, and that is something that we're struggling with as well, right? Also, when we look at certain developments in the urban areas, or like, how inclusive do we need to be, and how can we achieve inclusivity in urban development? Because we think it has positive impacts, and it's not about like social inclusivity, but it's also about, and you described it in the projects that you described, right? Density and space utilization is also reducing the ways people need to travel, right? It means like building microclusters for everyone to live there. Ideally, we're talking the urban village, right? The village in the urban area where I know the policeman, where I know the nurse, and where I know the doctor, and where I know my retailer, best case. I mean, it sounds a little bit old-fashioned, but that's not what I mean.
We do have these discussions, unfortunately, all the time. I just had it yesterday on a project in Cologne. It is based not even 300 meters away from the Dome. It's a small but very wonderful project, and we had a client who came up to us and said, listen, you wrote this book, Retail in Transition, and I want to build a real laboratory of retail in transition. Can we do that together? I have that site, and I just want to see what we can do there. We came up with a great concept together with them and introduced it to the city. And then the administration told us, listen, we love it. It's fantastic. We just have one problem. We just have a residential building right next to it because we want people to live in the city. It's like, wow, that's great. I mean, fantastic. People in the city. That's what we always tell you. You need people in the city. And they're like, yeah, but you have a rooftop bar. And we can't give you permission for a rooftop bar because there are people living right next to it. In terms of law, this is the right way how it works in Germany. But the other thing is like, if we want more density in our cities, if we want more different uses in the city, we have to be more liberal and more open. I mean, if you decide to live 300 meters away from the Dome in Cologne, then you are in the city and you can't expect that at 10 o'clock everyone is quiet. If you want that, move out to Dijkerhoeve. You will find it there. No problem.
I learned that back at university, that sometimes there are these lawsuits in German rental law and stuff like that, where you rent a flat next to a church. You cannot complain about the church bells ringing on Sunday, 10 a.m., right? But we can complain if we move next to a club or next to a restaurant. Then we can complain about the noise they make on a day-to-day basis after 10 p.m. So this to me is something that seems very odd always, because if it's deliberate by choice and if we want to live in city centers and stuff like that, we have to deal with certain also noise emissions and stuff like that. We had this very interesting discussion, I think, in our last podcast episode with Fabio, who is a professional chef and owns a couple of restaurants in Hamburg, about exactly that topic, because he said, how shall this work? It doesn't. But I think, and that maybe leads us to the next topic a little bit. So you described a lot of your projects and what you're doing, and we learned at the beginning that you're in it for quite a while now. So a lot of experience, and I would think that some paradigms have changed. So how you develop projects, how you see projects, how your customers see their projects. So what would you say are the one or two most significant paradigm changes in the last decade that you experienced and maybe even fostered, right, by the influence that you have?
Yeah, it's very, actually, it's funny if you say one or two, because that won't work. It is more. But let's put it in a very positive way. I think things have changed in a good way over the last years, also in the real estate industry. One thing is that I see that today we do not talk as much anymore about a single building, but of a city. There used to be a long time where it was always about, getting a star architect, build something really crazy and get the Bilbao effect, like with Frank Gehry's museum. I always thought that this was not the right way to produce architecture. And I always thought that there's always the means of having those buildings, but we cannot only think in those buildings, and not everyone has to think that he has to create something super, super special which stands out. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it is much better to, lower a little bit, to be a little bit more humble, and to integrate architecture into what you find at a certain space, and to integrate yourself and develop it on. That is something that has been understood as well as by the cities, as by the investors, as by the architects, and the whole industry. Another thing is that used to have, like in the city planning, but also in buildings, we always were thinking in having different quarters, different buildings for different uses. Mm-hmm. So you had residential quarters, you had shopping quarters, you had office quarters. And of course, that does not actually work very well with what you just described, or what we call the 15-minute city. And I think we have a big change already since like 20 years in the urban approach. What we have now in the last years, which I personally think is really good, is we also have different uses in one building. So also that adds up to changing our cities and making them more lively, and having cities becoming a better part, or having buildings becoming a better part of the cities that they're in. Another very, very important trend that we have, and that is actually very nice for us because that's where we come from. All my first projects were refurbishments. We do have a very big concentration right now on refurbishments, and especially, of course, since we have a big discussion on sustainability. We were talking about 2050 before, and by 2050, we want to be climate neutral. Most of the cities in Germany want to be neutral already in 2035. The new government here in North Rhine-Westphalia wants to be neutral in 2030, which is quite an aim. And that leads us actually to one thing, that sustainability and building don't go very well with each other. So if you look at ecological sustainability, it actually doesn't work, because whenever you build, you're going to emit CO2, which causes, of course, a problem. So I think in that discussion, we have to be very honest. And what I see is that we do have a very big focus on that, but looking a little bit deeper, there is not a lot. It's a lot of hot air that comes out of these discussions. Everyone is reducing, everyone is saving, and actually you cannot save when you're emitting. It's just not possible.
You can emit less, right?
And that's why we changed the way that we looked at our projects and said we have to be more honest about what we're actually doing. And one thing is we started looking at numbers, because I said I just want to know how much do our buildings emit. And no one was able to tell me, not in my office, not of the people that we work together with. And I was always like super interested in what other colleagues published, and it always seemed that they knew. But when you look deeper, you find out maybe they don't know that well. So, which led us actually to a question: is like, can we really talk about sustainability in the way that we do talk about sustainability if we actually don't get all the facts together? That's why we actually decided to take a step back and dig a little bit deeper. And we just published our first book on it. We call it Der Nachhalt, and it's the prologue. And it's actually a journey on which we want to go on, because we don't know where the journey is going to end. We know where we want to go, but we don't know what we will experience on the path. And by now, we can say that over the last years, with our research, we already experienced quite a lot of things, and we know quite a lot of things. We know that we are just in the very beginning, everyone. We know that we are by far not where we should be. We know that we have to change a lot in our attitude, how we use buildings, what we expect from buildings. And we know that we have different possibilities, and we know that the industry will change and will give us more opportunities. And the last thing is, we know that some opportunities that we would like to have, we do not have them at this point. And it is actually very stupid to talk about sustainable concrete. It's just not existing. Whoever tells you that, it is not true. But you can make it better, and you can, we will work on it. And I'm positive, but I think we need to be very honest on these things. And I think this is one thing that will, like for me, it's very important. When we talk about projects with our clients, I can sit down with them and sketch very quickly. And I can tell them in a very short time, listen, on this side, we will be able to place this and this amount of square meters. I can tell them, listen, the time scale will probably look like this. It will take us 1 year till we can give in a demand for a permission. After that, we will need half a year to a year to get the permission, and it will be 2 years of building, and everything will be, we can settle that down, and it will be quite reliable. We can also tell them how much the building will cost. And what I want to be able to is, I want to tell them how much their building emits. Like, you can do all those things that I talked about before in very complicated ways. As we call it in German, the Bierdeckelrechnung. I don't know what the proper translation into English would be. Like, just to very roughly calculate on something. So this is something that we want to do, and therefore we need to partner up with a lot of people to find out more things. I'm actually super positive because there's so many different chances and so many people working on the same thing. And I think if we get all this together, and if we only can be just like a little part of it, we can make these things go a little bit better, then that would be wonderful for our work, and I would be super happy.
It's really interesting that it comes like down to humbleness. In the end, you mentioned, like, you started in the check-in with the humbleness, that it was kind of important, and that it's now very important to be able to focus or be honest about, like, we don't know yet what our buildings emit or whatever. That otherwise, if you have too much ego, you wouldn't look at those corners, because the ego is like what brings you new projects.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hitting the point, but it's not only that, right? Because at the end, it's not only about ego. We're talking about like ESG scores. We're talking about, when we talk about the life cycle analysis, which is what you're referring to, Caspar, right? This is where the most uncertainty lies.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, for example, if you talk about ESG, we just had that discussion yesterday with a client of ours. Let's be honest. No one really knows what ESG is. It is such an open thing, it's such a black box, and everyone can give you great explanations, and there are companies who tell you, listen, I will advise you on it, and just pay me a lot of money, and then your building's going to be the best ESG thing ever. But in the end, there is no real estate convention without at least one panel on ESG. It is really tough to get so much hot air into one room.
I totally agree. It's crazy. Like, sometimes it feels like people don't want other people to really understand what it's about.
Yeah.
To really have that, to keep that level of hot air, to not be in need to be honest to yourself, to know we don't know what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I think maybe it is also that it is something that everyone has to do. but not everyone is really convinced that they want to do it. I mean, if you ask people, then they're like, in the end, listen, I just want to make money. And then, of course, it doesn't really come together. So it is important that we see ourselves as architects also as part of the real estate industry, that we, in that industry, everything combined together, we just have to take that challenge. It is on us. We as in the building sector, we emit more than 50% of the CO2 worldwide. 50%. So the question is always, what change can I do? And when I talk to people, I often hear the argument, we in Germany cannot do anything because we are so small. That is right and wrong at the same time, but it is also quite stupid because we emitted till now as much CO2 as the whole of Africa and the whole of South America. So how is it possible that we cannot do anything? We still emit 6% of the CO2 worldwide. That is, of course, not China and not the US, but it is still 6%. And the other thing is, we are a highly developed society and we have a highly developed industry. So if we find the key how to lower those emissions, be sure that those countries who really need it, for example, China and others, will jump on it. And they will be happy to follow it if we have simple ways to do it. And the other thing is, we have been emitting for so long, so much, and taken away, out of that cake, so many pieces, that actually there is not a lot left for those countries who still want to develop. Yeah. So we really have to find a way of defining what is actually the proper cake that we can use and how can we reduce our emissions.
I agree 100%. But what we must not forget as well is that is only one part of this huge equation, is the whole emission part, right? And we've been discussing earlier when we talk about sustainability or even ESG, it refers obviously, because that is a topic at hand, everybody discusses that, CO2 budgets, emissions, embodied carbon. But there is also the social aspect, right? Environmental, social, governance.
For us, sustainability contains out of three different things. We have ecological sustainability, we have economical sustainability, and we have social sustainability. And that's like a triangle. Mm-hmm. You have to get those three things together. I said building and sustainability don't go together, but I said and ecological sustainability. But since sustainability is much more, mm-hmm. we cannot only look at the ecological part. That would be super ecological. We stop building. That's perfect. That's everyone's going to be happy. Just no one has work, no one has food, maybe not such a good solution. And we need the space as well. So what we have to come up with is we have to come up with a model where we look at each part. And what we do is actually we have like these triangles and we try to find out where does each of our projects stand. Are we maybe more on a ecological project, maybe more on an economical project, or maybe more on a social project? If we are, how can we get the other aspects into the project so that even if they are more ecological, even if they're more social, or even if they're more economical, we still can feed the other parts and be in the middle of the triangle and not on the outer side. I'm just reading a very interesting book from Kate Raworth. She's a Oxford-based scientist, actually economist, and she wrote a book called The Donut Model. She has the donut, and she says that the donut has actually the outer space, which is the atmospherical, and the inner space, which is the social. So what you have to be is like you have to see if you can, we actually have to live within the donut. If we go into the hole in the middle, that's where social aspects are underperformed. And if we go outside of the donut, that's where atmospherical and ecological aspects are outperformed. I think it's a very good theory to look at, and it's a very simple thing to... We as an office, we say that the main part in our office is the human scale. We call it Maßstab Mensch. When we say Maßstab Mensch is what our work is based on, it always means is the human being always in the center, or can the human being, for us in our work, of course, be the most important thing because it is for humans that we are building. But if we are so important and if nature has its other importance, we might have to step back and not be in the center because you are in the center of attention if you're sometimes not in the center.
Mm-hmm.
Back to our triangle, you can have a triangle with equal sides and then the center is always in the center. But look at other triangles and then try to find out where the center actually is. And you have different points of gravity. I think this is something where we in the future will also look at in our projects to find other ways to get different things together. And actually, when I said we published the prologue, the next 3 books are going to be on social, economical, and ecological sustainability. So
this makes sense.
Yeah,
this makes sense.
I have it up again.
Yeah. It's a question of balance. Like in most of the cases, it's a question of balance.
Definitely.
And having like those 3 things in your head, like when looking at projects, really makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Caspar, we have to come to an end. And we love to end the episodes with a quick fire round. So now it's really about like gut feeling and speed. You only have 60 seconds for 10 questions. The question is, are you ready?
I am ready.
You are ready. Perfect. So high-rise or low-rise buildings?
Ground scraper.
Develop in cities or in rural areas?
In cities.
Environmental or social impact?
Both.
Rent or own a car?
Rented.
Build new or modernize?
Modernize.
Retail or housing?
Mixed use.
Functional or aesthetic?
Both.
Disruptive or keeping with tradition?
Disruptive and always looking at traditions.
Private or public?
Private and public together. It's like 2 things that go together.
Okay, now we're going to twist it a little bit. The last thing that you bought at a retailer, was it online or was it offline?
I fear it was online.
Thank you, Caspar, for being our guest today. So we had
great
a
being
lot
with
of
you.
fun. We learned new things. We'll definitely keep in mind a lot of things you mentioned today.
Me too.
So thank you for that.
I definitely got to say, we have to figure out if your old painting school in Italy still has a real Caspar somewhere in their archives. So this is something that we need to figure out.
I have some drawings here, and I'm sure when you guys are coming to the Rhineland, I will show you some.
Looking forward to that.
to it.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I hope I'm a better architect than a painter.
I mean, that others should judge about that. Right? Definitely not us. So, also from my side, thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure having you. And looking forward to meet you soon.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. And if you are about to raise a round, drop us a note at LinkedIn or via email at idea@2bx.vc. Let's have a talk and see where we can help.